Hello and welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha. Here we cut through the noise and bring to you the most important stories that move the markets. I am your host Anurag Bansal, and in today's episode we'll talk about three big stories. We'll start by talking about how Aditya Birla is now getting into the jewellery business. In the second story, we'll talk about how insurance might soon become cheaper for us. And in the final third story, we'll talk about how crude prices might rise again because of global conflicts. By the way, this podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, and also as a video on YouTube. You can choose wherever you consume your content. We also send out a daily brief newsletter every morning that captures the essence of everything we've discussed through the day. So if you're interested, do subscribe through Substack. So let's begin with the first story about Aditya Birla Group's plans to enter the jewellery market of India. Now this is a big deal because we are talking about a market that is worth 6,40,000 crore rupees. But before we get into the details, let me give you some context about the jewellery sector. See, unorganized players used to dominate 95% of the market back in the 2000s, but now it has come down to 64%. Organized players have expanded using franchisees, and this is largely due to evolving consumer preferences. Titan's played a big role over here. They introduced the carat meter in order to verify gold purity, which was a game changer for people to make a shift from unorganized to organized players. Motilal Oswal Financial Services also recently published a report on this sector. So while we are talking about it, let me give you some interesting pointers from it. First, India imports about 60 to 70% of its gold, which is mostly for the purpose of jewelry. Second, 20% of gold consumption comes from recycled gold. Third, bridal jewelry makes up for about 55% of the total demand of gold. Fourth, the demand peaks usually during the wedding seasons and festivals. Fifth, agricultural output and monsoon patterns also influence demand in rural areas. These rural markets account for about 58% of the total jewelry demand of the country. Next, top 10 organized players have over 30% market share in this industry. Margins in this business are around 20 to 25%. Now, Kumar Mangalam Birla, who is the chairman of the Aditya Birla Group, said that they are investing 5,000 crore rupees in this market in the next few years. Their aim is to grow at 50% CAGR and become one of the top 3 national jewelry retailers in just the next 5 years. Listen to what he said recently.
Our conviction about the size of the opportunity here is matched by the size of our bet. We're investing 5,000 crores over the next 2 years in this business to ramp up nationally. This represents an unmatched equity infusion in this space. We will be among the top 3 national jewelry retailers over the next 5 years, and will continue to grow at a CAGR of 50%.
Now, Aditya Birla's timing seems to be really good to meet their expectations. See, the recent budget cut customs duty on gold from 15% to 6%, and also we are headed into the festive and wedding seasons now. Plus, if the economy stays strong and monsoons are good, gold demand should also increase. Now, while we're on this topic, let me also take a moment and explain some global gold trends from the World Global Council. First, recycled gold supply hit a Q2 high since 2012 this time. It was up 4% year on year. Second, Indian gold jewelry demand fell by 17% year on year due to high prices. Third, gold ETFs outflows continued despite record prices. Fourth, central banks kept buying gold. This was up 6% from last year but 39% lower than the Q1 of 2024. And this has been the dominant reason for the rise in gold prices as well. Now, the reason central banks are buying gold is to diversify and protect their reserves against economic instability, inflation, and currency risks. Now, moving on to the next story, Nitin Gadkari, who's the Minister for Road Transport and Highways, recently wrote to the Finance Minister. He asked for a reduction in the GST on health and term insurance premiums. Now, currently we are paying 18% GST on these insurance plans, and Mr. Gadkari thinks that this price is unfair for something that is so essential. I'll give you some context to explain this better. See, insurance penetration in India is already very low, and there are two main reasons behind it. First is the lack of awareness, and second is the high premiums. The 18% GST on top of these premiums makes it even harder for people to buy insurance, especially in a country like India. And this is exactly what Mr. Gadkari is trying to solve. So what happens if the GST is reduced? See, health and term insurances would become more affordable. This could lead to significant savings, especially since these need to be renewed regularly as well. It might even encourage more people to buy health insurance and life insurances over time. Moving on to the last story of the day, we'll talk about how crude prices might really rise up once again if global conflicts continue. See, with all the global conflicts we keep hearing about daily, the world seems to be getting more and more dangerous by the day. It all started with Russia invading Ukraine, and then we saw a bunch of conflicts in Africa, and now the Israel-Palestine situation looks like it is about to go off the rails. Recently, Ismail Haniyeh, who's a top Hamas leader, was assassinated in Tehran, which is Iran's capital. While some signs point to Israel, they haven't officially claimed responsibility yet. Now, this is important to know because this assassination could really push the region into an all-out war. Interestingly, just a few weeks ago, there was hope for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, but after this episode, it remains to be seen how Hamas and Iran will react. For your context, in April 2024, Iran had launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel after an Iranian commander was killed. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because of one major commodity, oil. See, the Middle East accounts for about 30% of global crude production, and the seas around it are very crucial for shipping crude. If this region blows up, oil production will take a big hit, and that is bad news for everyone, but especially for India because we import more than 80% of our oil. I'll give you some numbers. See, in June 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, crude hit $120 per barrel. As of today, for your context, it is around $76. But if war breaks out in the Middle East and crude production is disrupted, things may not actually be as bad as you might imagine it to be. See, over the last 50 years or so, the global economy has become much less reliant on oil as compared to what it used to be. Oil intensity, which is the amount of oil required to produce $1,000 worth of GDP, has declined. According to a Columbia University estimate, the world used about 1 barrel of oil to produce $1,000 worth of GDP. However, by 2019, global oil intensity was 0.43 barrels per $1,000 of global GDP, which was at a 56% decline. Oil production is more diverse now though. The US, Russia and Canada are big players and not just OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia. The World Bank also ran some scenarios last year assuming a baseline price of $90 per barrel. See, in the case of a small disruption, oil could hit $93 to $102 per barrel. For a medium disruption, it could hit $109 to $121 per barrel. And for a large disruption, oil could hit $140 to $157 per barrel. Now, higher oil prices means people also spend more on energy, which is already a big part of household budgets. But that is just the start. This also means higher production costs for everything, including food, transportation, and clothing. Companies will naturally end up passing these costs on to us consumers. Also, higher crude prices lead to higher inflation, which means central banks would keep interest rates high. And if people expect inflation to stay high, it affects spending and investment decisions, which ripples throughout the entire economy. So in summary, let's hope that the situation in the Middle East does not really spiral out of control, or we might be headed for some really big trouble. That's all the news I have for you today. I hope you found value in this episode. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.